Ian Bremmer, I want you to give the first question to Jack Lew. There's too much to talk about now. How would you frame the nation's challenges, our risks this year as you speak to Jack Lew?
Well, we were talking a little bit before the show started about the chaos, about how much it is it takes a very long time to make things work. It takes a much shorter time to break them. I know Jack's very worried about, as someone who was Secretary of Treasury and spent so much time working so hard, right, and finding that Washington is sclerotic and you can't make policies happen, you can't move the needle for people. Right. But if you now have a geopolitical order where the principal actors are trying to break it. The Russians want to break the geopolitical order. The Chinese want a new geopolitical order that goes towards them. The United States is uninterested in providing support for the old geopolitical order. How much does that chaos worry Jack?
I mean, I want to go back to something calm, John Farrow, like Brexit is sort of a calmer discussion here. But, Mr. Secretary, I want to go back.
You asked me to ask you.
I want to set it up for you. No, please go ahead. Go ahead, please.
And then you jump in.
I think,
excuse me.
If you look at the risks facing the world, and I read, the Eurasia report, I think it identifies many of the key risks. The thing that underlies so much of it is chaos. It's the unpredictability of key leaders. It's the lack of a North Star with the United States stepping back in so many ways. And it's this kind of destructive policy without anything constructive to take its place. And that's true on issue after issue here in the United States. I think that, you look at markets over the last year, the calmness of markets, the enthusiasm of markets, almost suggests that there's been a decision to look beyond all of this chaos and uncertainty, because what can we do about it? But then when the moment comes when something happens that is a surprise that shouldn't be a surprise, I worry about binary kind of changes.
I want to cut to the January chase. Greg Vallier's report this morning was shocking of how compressed this month is in Washington. I want to go back to the beginning of your career with Joe Moakley of Massachusetts, who was the most basic of politicians from another time. What does your Democratic Party need to do to provide leadership within this chaos? What do you wish from Mr. Schumer, from Ms. Pelosi and others?
Look, fundamentally, Democrats are not in charge right now, so I don't think it's fair or realistic to look to Democrats to lead the way out of this. You have an administration that chose to make policy in a very, very one-party way, did not include Democrats in any of the conversation. Now they can't probably rally their own troops to do the basic business of running the government, making sure we don't default on the debt, making sure children don't get thrown off of health insurance, all kinds of things they're going to be looking to Democrats to help. I think the challenge is going to be to truly work together, and truly working together doesn't mean coming with a fait accompli and saying we need your vote. Truly working together means going back and doing things that you wouldn't have otherwise done to reach a consensus around some kind of a reasonable compromise. Reasonable compromise is the basis for working together. We're not seeing any of that coming out of the White House.
Secretary Lew, you've called this legislation dangerous, this tax bill. Why is this dangerous?
Look, I think if you look at the tax bill, what it does is almost the exact opposite of what anxious and angry voters were calling for in an election just a year ago. You have people who are worried about where do they fit in an economy where technology and trade and globalization seem to be changing all the rules that they grew up with. And what we need is training, we need education, we need infrastructure, we need to invest in the kind of workforce of the future that gives people the confidence that they have a place in it. What we've seen is a tax cut that spends money we don't have to have very concentrated benefits for global corporations and the top 1%, and it's leaving us broke so that we cannot deal with these fundamental problems, so we're farther behind in actually making progress. And I fear that the next shoe to drop is going to be an attack on the most vulnerable in our society. How are we going to pay for the deficit caused by the tax cut? You're going to see proposals to cut health insurance from poor people, to take basic food support away from poor people, to attack Medicare and Social Security. One could not have made up a more cynical strategy.
And people are going to reject things that otherwise are good when they don't work for them. So, free trade, good thing for the world, for global growth, but people reject it if they think it doesn't work for them. Technology, obviously a good thing, but they reject it when they see the government doesn't work for them. And what Jack is saying now is that on the back of this extraordinary tax bill, if you're going to see cuts for the average people, their response is going to be vastly greater rejectionism of the establishment and political polarization. And the Democrats and the Republicans are both going to have to deal with
these issues, Secretary Lew, did not arrive overnight with the election of President Donald Trump. They've existed for a long, long time. The United States has been spending money it hasn't had for a long, long time. I guess my question is, why is this any different to what we've seen before?
Well, first of all, I've been in office in several different periods, and I've spent 3 years running the Office of Management and Budget in the Clinton administration. We ran a surplus. We fixed a problem. When I came into the Office of Management and Budget in the Obama administration, we went from a deficit of almost 10% of GDP to 3% of GDP. We've now consciously, intentionally, as a government, made a decision to add substantial amounts of debt at a time when the economy doesn't need fiscal stimulus. What it needs is targeted investment in the things that people need for a better future. The risk of this tax bill is both a further disenchantment with institutions, and if you look at what, and the report gets to this, the kind of rejection of institutions. How are people going to respect institutions more when they realize what this tax bill does?
I want to set this debate with, and if you're just joining us now on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television, Jack Lew and Ian Bremmer. Let me set it up in terms of Boston, where it's going to be 13 below zero in Brockton, I think, on Saturday. Ian Bremmer, you grew up tough in Chelsea, and when you're living fat and large in Weston or Wellesley Hills, you know where Chelsea is. How would your mother do it today in this environment in Chelsea? Could you have gotten to Tulane in this milieu today?
Let's be clear. I didn't grow up tough. I grew up getting my ass kicked in Chelsea. It's slightly different. If you look at me, you understand why. But I'm good for radio. I think that today my mother would have voted for Trump, or she would have maybe voted for Bernie Sanders. There's absolutely no way she would have voted for a mainstream Democrat or Republican. My brother voted for Trump. There ain't nobody else from my neighborhood that got out of the Chelsea projects that, is now talking on Bloomberg or Global. And I think that it's precisely that environments like it all over the country, that are saying this isn't working.
Then what does your party need to do to gain dominance in the Chelseas of Wisconsin or Minnesota, where you lost the election?
Look, that is a good question. What you're talking about used to be the base of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And we need to find a way to communicate with people, talking about the things that I'm talking about. And I think Ian's right. You can't win by saying trade is the whole problem when that's not the whole problem. You have to talk to people respectfully and explain to them what it is you're going to do so that they can have a piece of the economic pie going forward. Look, we have a lot of problems that if we didn't have dysfunctional government, we could have made more progress on over the last couple of decades. I mean, it's not as if any of the things that I'm saying we need to do are either rocket science or particularly partisan ideas. We've had a government that's been incapable of working together. And that dysfunction is really a problem.